Srila Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, my spiritual master, on the 26th annual ceremony of his disappearance day. He lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him. End quote. On the absolute platform, the spiritual master's appearance and disappearance are the same, he told us. Both are beautiful, just like the sunrise and the sunset. And next, I have another quote from the Krishna book, description of autumn. In the rainy season, when the clouds appear for the first time, the peacocks dance with joy upon seeing them. The peacocks can be compared to persons who are very much harassed in the materialistic way of life. If they can find the association of a person engaged in the loving, devotional service of the Lord, they become enlightened and dance just like peacocks. We have practical experience of this. Many of our students were dry and morose previous to their coming to Krishna consciousness. But having come into contact with devotees, they are now dancing like jubilant peacocks. So Prabhupada's comparing us to peacocks. What do you think of that? Now this is another show and tell. We know the Srimad Bhagavatam was always an important part of Srila Prabhupada's life. Lord Chaitanya said there are 5 things that are most important for advancement in devotional service. Sadhu Sangha Nama Kirtan Bhagavat Shravan Mathura Vas Srimurtira Shraddhaya Seva. Sadhu Sangha, association with devotees. Nama Kirtan, hearing and chanting the holy names. Bhagavat Shravan, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Mathura Vas, living in a holy place like Mathura. Srimurtira Shraddhaya Sevan, and serving Srimurti, the deities, with great care and with great faith. So when Prabhupada finally, we know he's spent many hours in the small hours of the night translating Srimad Bhagavatam and other books. The Krishna book is also Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a summary study of the 10th canto. And then the Chaitanya Charitamrita and the Nectar of Devotion. So at that point in Vrindavan, in 1977, November 14th, he was lying on his bed, and Pradyumna was reading the Sanskrit. But Sri Prabhupada would also consult the commentaries of the acharyas like Jiva Goswami, and even persons in other sampradayas to get more insight for translating Srimad Bhagavatam and writing his purports. He said, I've made it for the common man. So, when Prabhupada was physically present, our Bhagavatam volumes were much more narrow. Now they make big thick ones. Now about 2.5 of those volumes would make one of our thick volumes. But they had one chapter left over that Prabhupada actually, this is the last, they came out with one volume, and you can see it's quite narrow. It's a one chapter, and it's thick paper also. It's only, I believe, about 7. I mean, the Bhagavatam part, without all the appendixes and everything, is only 78 pages, but they made a volume of this one chapter, which was Lord Brahma stealing, this is chapter 13 of the 10th canto, Lord Brahma stealing the cows and cowherd boys from Krishna. And then they decided to make one volume. And there's a nice foreword by the publishers. It says here, this is the final Srimad Bhagavatam volume translated by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. It is smaller than the earlier volumes because it ends where the renowned author stopped translating just before his departure from this material world, November 14, 1977, at the Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan, India. The first part of this volume was produced in the usual fashion. Srila Prabhupada would sit and read silently from the Sanskrit text, and then speak the translation and commentary into his dictaphone. Later, due to illness, it became necessary for his disciples to assist him personally. In these last days, Srila Prabhupada was gravely ill, unable to eat for weeks. His health had deteriorated, making even the slightest movement excruciatingly painful. As he lay still, a devotee would softly read the Sanskrit to him. Another disciple sitting on his bed held the microphone to him, nearly touching his mouth. And then Srila Prabhupada would speak, voice sometimes barely audible. These recordings, made in his quarters at the temple, constitute the balance of this book. In these final moments, the physician attending His Divine Grace confided that an ordinary man in such critical conditions would have been crying out from the intense pain. Srila Prabhupada's disciples were awestruck as they watched their spiritual master work quietly, undisturbed. In the last part of the book, we find Srila Prabhupada's usual clarity of thoughts, constant scriptural references, scrupulous attention to detail and rigorous philosophical exposition, fully intact, as they were in the preceding 29 volumes of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada's last days and his translation will stand as an inspiring reminder that even the severest material circumstances cannot impede the activities of a pure devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Signed, the publishers. So if you've seen a video of Srila Prabhupada on his bed, he was skin and bones, and he would say, this body is a bag of bones. And he even would stop eating and even sometimes he would stop drinking water. But he had such clarity of mind. I'm just going to read the last translation in purport. Then rising very gradually and wiping his two eyes, Lord Brahma looked up at Mukunda. Lord Brahma, his head bent low, his mind concentrated and his body trembling, very humbly began with faltering words to offer praises to Lord Krishna. Purport. Brahma, being very joyful, began to shed tears, and he washed the lotus feet of Krishna with his tears. Repeatedly, he fell and rose as he recalled the wonderful activities of the Lord. After repeating obeisances for a long time, Brahma stood up and smeared his hands over his eyes. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments that the word lochane indicates that with his two hands he wiped the two eyes of each of his four faces. Seeing the Lord before him, Brahma began to offer prayers with great humility, respect, and attention. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport of the 10th canto, 13th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Stealing of the Boys and Calves by Brahma. So, Srila Prabhupada did this for us. And he was transcendental. He was transcendental to the bodily concept of life. We get upset when we get flu. But Prabhupada was completely beyond the bodily concept of life. When it took a few years, actually, before they decided to finish the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the GBC handed the job over to Srila Prabhupada ki. The GBC handed the job over to Hridayananda Maharaj, Hridayananda Das Goswami. And he also was assisted by Gopi Paranandana, a great Sanskrit scholar. I used to go out preaching with Gopi Paranandana in Los Angeles. And Dravida, who was mainly the English editor. But these prayers of Lord Brahma, which are the 14th chapter, were very philosophical. So Hridayananda Maharaj said they decided they were going to start with the 11th canto. So then they did the 11th canto, then the 12th, and they came back to finish the 10th canto with the prayers of Lord Brahma. Okay. So we are giving thanks to Srila Prabhupada for his mercy.
Thank you very much. His Grace Ramanujacharya Prabhu ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Just before Maharaj speaks, I'd like to remind you again about your mobile phones. Just please do a check, because inevitably it goes off somewhere. Please put it on silent. Thank you. So we welcome His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Swami Maharaj ki.
Namo Shri Krishna Prestaya Bhutale, Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tamne, Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastucha Deshatarane, Vajkalpaturubhyascha Kripasindhubhya Evacha, Panitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Yes, well, thank you all for coming. It's very nice you're here. And it is very, very special occasion. The disappearance day of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, who's the person who brought Krishna consciousness to the Western world, and after doing that and Krishna consciousness spreading throughout the Western world, then he went back to India, and since then Krishna consciousness has spread in India in amazing ways. So Srila Prabhupada, as Ramanujacharya Prabhu was saying, was just very special devotee, very amazing devotee. And he himself adopted the already existing term founder Acharya for himself in relation to his International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Founder Acharya, this is a term you don't find exactly in Bhagavad Gita, for example, Srimad Bhagavatam, or other of the Vedic literatures, but it's a term which over the years and even millennia has been adopted and applied to different devotees who were extremely prominent, and prominent in the sense that they spread Krishna consciousness in very amazing and special ways, practically unique ways, unlike any of their contemporaries or even people from the not so distant past, but going back a bit into the past. The practice developed of using the term founder Acharya if one of those devotees had established like a particular wing of the Krishna consciousness movement and adopted certain bona fide practices which had not so much been applied before with great effect and with very wonderful results. So this was the case with Srila Prabhupada. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati himself didn't exactly use the term, although some of his disciples adopted it in due course. He did adopt the term President Acharya for his organization, for his position in his organization. But it's really important to note that Srila Prabhupada, he specifically adopted, practiced the use of this term for himself. Like I mentioned, it indicates a very special devotee who does very special things and establishes a part of the greater line of Krishna consciousness, but a part which has special characteristics which have not really so much been there before. In the case of Srila Prabhupada, for example, when he first started the Krishna consciousness movement, the main sort of public activity presenting Krishna consciousness to the public was Harinam Sankirtan. And I remember myself, when I first joined in London, for at least all of us, unless those who were not really fit enough to go out and walk up and down the streets all day, they would stay back and cook or do deity worship. But everybody else who could manage it physically, we were all out on Harinam Sankirtan all day, every day, at least 6 days a week. So that was there, and I remember doing it myself and even being arrested multiple times for doing it by the London police. But then it was sort of in the middle, maybe, of 73. I'd been a resident of the temple in London for 6 months by that time. Then Srila Prabhupada sent out, what would you say, like an all points bulletin, or just completely international communication, that now we want to focus not so much on Harinam Sankirtan, chanting the holy names in the streets. We will do that, but we want to focus on distributing Krishna consciousness through the distribution of our books. And within days, at least I remember in London, that's what happened. Now, instead of going out chanting in the streets, except for, it was Saturday nights we would go out chanting in the streets, but otherwise, everyone who used to go out chanting in the streets was now distributing Prabhupada's books. So that was one thing which Srila Prabhupada introduced, which was different. And I mean, let's face it, was only physically possible at the time that he was really active. Because previously, if you go back some generations into, say, the 19th century or so, if you wanted a copy of Bhagavad Gita, you had to employ a scribe to copy it by hand, the whole thing. And it was like, okay, come back in 6 months and you can have your copy of Bhagavad Gita. It's literally what the case was. But of course, when Prabhupada was active, like 60s and 70s, then it was possible to mass produce books. So he did that. And that's one thing which distinguishes him from others of his contemporaries, or even those who were there in the not so distant past. And then, of course, his whole mission of going to the Western world. And not just a few people going, like a small handful, and doing a little something here and there, but actually very little, really speaking. So Srila Prabhupada started this movement of spreading Krishna consciousness amongst the Westerners, which includes me, but it also includes all of you, I'm afraid, because even though the majority of you, or maybe all, are from Indian backgrounds, but you're sort of hybrids. There's a blend, a real blend with the Western culture. When I came to South Africa, one of the first people I met, maybe not the first day, but maybe the second day, was a fellow who was a friend at the moment. And I asked him, what's your name? And he said, well, my name is, what was it? Krishna Gopal. He said Govinda, or you could say Govinda. But everyone calls me Fred. I promise you. It's a blend, isn't it? It's a blend of cultures. So Srila Prabhupada was instructed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta to spread Krishna consciousness in the English language as such. So that was really a special feature, even though Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had sent, I'm not sure how many, but maybe 3 or 4 or something like that, disciples, 1 or 2 to Germany and 1 or 2 to England. Yes. So this is another unique thing in the case of Srila Prabhupada. And just look at what happened. The Hare Krishna explosion happened. It was really something previously totally unheard of, and that people, devotees, had not even really dreamed, what to speak like having thought about, let's try and do it. But they never even dreamed that it might be possible. Then other things too, we can mention one other important and interesting thing, is to have ashrams, where, of course, men would live, but also, separately, obviously, ladies would live. That was more or less unheard of in the tradition of Krishna consciousness. In some of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's temples, they had a little place where some widows would stay, elderly ladies with shaved heads, wearing white, who somehow or other ended up on their own, but they're devotees. But Srila Prabhupada really established ladies' ashrams and emphasized even, like I mentioned, going out and distributing books, ladies doing it. Young ladies doing it in big cities. Yes. So these are some special, you could say, innovations, possibly you could use that term, within the context of Krishna consciousness. And it's not like they're sort of just way out things or, irresponsible things at all. But they are innovative. And Srila Prabhupada, let me read, this is from a letter of Srila Prabhupada's to one devotee who has just opened a temple, started a temple somewhere in America. Prabhupada says to that devotee, it's very good that you've already opened the center and registered the society. This is good beginning. One thing regarding registering is that our system is to keep the name of the founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, on all registration documents, as well as all stationery, like letterheads and so on, books and publications. So I see the name there on the letterhead, in the letter which he had been sent, explaining that they had opened a center. So it is all right. In this way, do it. It might sound, and to some people it did sound like, what's the term? I don't know, sort of self-flattery to write something like that on all our registration documents, all of our books, all of our letterheads, because in those days there was no email, there wasn't even SMS. If you wanted to communicate, and phoning was expensive. To phone to India, first of all, you had to wait a day, book a call, and would really cost money. So normally to communicate with Prabhupada, people would write a letter, either write by hand or type out a letter, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, go to the post office and send it like that. So Prabhupada wanted that this founder Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, would be there on all those things. And the books and other publications like magazines or newsletters, just anything which came from the organization must have that. And he insisted, and he actually referred to it when he saw some devotees had not done it. They just, on one book, small book, they just put, author A.C. Bhaktivedanta, not even Swami, what to speak of His Divine Grace, and Prabhupada or founder Acharya, just A.C. Bhaktivedanta. Prabhupada called it an insidious contamination. That they had not, it was the result of some insidious contamination coming from somewhere. We won't get into that too much, but yeah, that they had done like that. So it wasn't just Prabhupada being sort of self-indulgent at all, but rather it was really essential for the organization to be taken like really seriously. And Prabhupada insisted on it again and again. So yeah, Prabhupada's founder Acharya, a very special person, and he gave us a number of things. I mentioned some of the sort of unique things, but otherwise in general, Prabhupada gave us ISKCON, he gave us the Association of Devotees. And Prabhupada said that I have, in fact it's in one of his purports, I have created ISKCON just so people can get the Association of Devotees. Means us. That's us. Means you. Get your association. Yeah. And let me close by telling you a little story. Very nice little story, I'm very fond of it. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard it before. It actually came to me from His Holiness B.B. Govinda Maharaj. He was there when Srila Prabhupada was in his last days in Vrindavan. And of course, he's like a very special kirtan person, Govinda Maharaj. And Prabhupada had kirtan going on 24 hours a day. So Govinda Maharaj was there regularly, every day for hours, and then take a break and come back again for hours, and so on. And one time he was there in the room, and one of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers, his name was Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj. Although he was like a sannyasi, he'd been given sannyas, but he was practicing the Babaji way of being a devotee. Means basically just all day just sitting and chanting under very austere conditions. So, and Prabhupada appreciated him, and he really, Krishnadas Maharaj, really appreciated Prabhupada, which unfortunately, however many of his godbrothers, they weren't so strong on that. To put it mildly in many cases. But he really appreciated Prabhupada, Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj. So he came and just jumped on the bed, like at Prabhupada's feet, and started conversing with Prabhupada in Bengali. And he started joking. And Prabhupada, like immediately before his arrival, as was the case generally in those last weeks and days like that, Prabhupada had been very grave and basically, to a large degree, silent, just lying there. But now, Krishnadas Babaji jumped on the end of the bed, right by Prabhupada's feet, and started speaking with Prabhupada and joking. And suddenly Prabhupada was smiling and joking back. It was quite a transformation under the circumstances. So that going back and forth and a kind of very jolly and happy exchange went on for a little while. Suddenly, Prabhupada stopped and turned to his disciples and indicated them. And Prabhupada said, Tandira Charana Sevi, Bhakta Sanivas, Janame Hoy, E Abhilas, which is, it's narrated as Takwa, that all I want, Bhakta Sanivas, is to live with devotees and serve their lotus feet. That's all I want. Janame hoy, e abhilas. Life after life. That is my only desire. And then he turned back to Krishnadas Babaji, and again it was smiling in this jolly mood and joking. And Prabhupada getting into that also. So that went on for another few minutes, or just few minutes, maybe 5. And then suddenly, Prabhupada stopped. And he pointed to the disciples, the Kirtan party, and said, Tandira Charana Sevi, Bhakta Sanevas, Janame Hoy, E Abhilas. You understand it by now. The same thing. The same thing. All I want is to live in the company of devotees and serve their lotus feet birth after birth. And then back to Krishnadas Babaji, and again the same thing we described. And then some minutes later, same thing, stopped, pointed to the disciples or indicated in some way. Tandira Charana Sevi, Bhakta Sanevas, Janame Hoy, E Abhilas. So Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada said so many things. When you look at something like, for just argument's sake, the Bible, there's certain things there which are sort of, attributed to Jesus supposedly saying, and maybe he did say it. But the amount that Prabhupada said, and which is there, it's actually there. It's, I don't know how many 1,000 times more, but it's thousands of times more. It really is. And, with all due respect, of a much greater depth of knowledge, of spiritual knowledge, including elaborate knowledge of the soul, and specifically in detail how to reawaken our spiritual natures. It's stupendous. It's massive. To read everything Prabhupada said, well, most devotees struggle to finish Srimad Bhagavatam once. That's just part of it. Yeah, and there's plenty more. There's really plenty more. So, yes. But this is a very important point. Prabhupada has given us so many things, but he has given us each other. His devotees, his followers, his servants. Yeah, he's given us like that. And what a gift. What an incredible gift. It's just amazing. It's beyond amazing, actually. So, we must make the most of that. You know, sometimes you get a bit of backbiting amongst some devotees, some criticism occasionally, but we should avoid that, as they say, like the plague. Like the plague. The plague was worse than COVID. It was a lot worse than COVID, the plague. Actually, it's even still going on, the plague. They get cases coming up every now and then, the Black Death, the plague. So it was really a lot worse than COVID. And you remember COVID. What a nightmare. So as the saying goes, avoid it like the plague. Yeah. We should avoid negativity. If someone's got a problem with someone else within Krishna consciousness, don't get caught up in it, but advise them, approach the relevant people, and at least they can try to help with it. But of course, chit-chatting with other sort of peers of yourself is not going to give any solutions, that's for sure. But really, we should understand what a blessing it is to have Prabhupada's movement and the association of the devotees of Srila Prabhupada. And we should really make like a life's mission of how to develop really nice Krishna conscious relationships, personal relationships, with as many devotees as possible. And don't forget what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, he who criticizes me is my friend, and he who flatters me is my enemy. But even though if you bump into some negativity, try and respond to it with Krishna consciousness. What have I done? Oh, look, it's 12:30. Oh my gosh, sorry about that. Anyway, please bear this all in mind. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Maharaj. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Damodar ki Jai. Shri Giriraj Godhan ki Jai. Shri Shri